Good evening. My name is Janice McKinney, and I would like to thank you all for joining us for our Broadway Market Revitalization Plan Input and Survey Findings Update meeting. I welcome all of you and thank you for your input during these past several months. Our findings will be shared through our presentation this evening. At this time, please let me acknowledge all of those who have supported us through these efforts. Assembly Member, Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, Mark Boyd is representing her office this evening, Senator Tim Kennedy, Amanda Mays, Regional Director of Western New York Empire State Development, Paul Tronalone, Vice President of Policy of Empire State Development, Joanna Walczyk, Senior Project Manager of Western New York, Legislator Howard Johnson, who is on the call with us this evening, Laura Cabral, Director of UB Regional Institute in the Eastside Avenues Program, Mayor Brown, Councilmember Mitch Nowakowski, who is on with us this evening, and Kathy Peterson, Broadway Market Manager. I would like to introduce Robert Stark of CJS Architects, who is serving as lead on this project, who will provide you with an overview of tonight's meeting. Bob?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We appreciate you tuning in tonight and providing your input. As the first slide said, the presentation is to share information that we've gained so far from the community through a series of meetings. This is our third really public engagement. Share what we've learned and to solicit more input as well. So first I'd like to tell you who we are and what we do. I'm Bob Stark, a principal with CJS Architects located in Buffalo, New York, and the project lead. Our goal will ultimately be to, as architects, to provide some suggestions for changes physical changes that could take place in the market. That will happen at the end of this process. Our major team leader as well is Public Market Development, Aaron Zareski, who will be speaking to you quite a bit tonight. Aaron has developed markets all over the country and is acknowledged as the preeminent public market expert in the country. And the major role of Aaron is basically to develop a marketing and management plan for the market to make it a successful and vibrant market to basically enhance the whole neighborhood. Also on our team is Janice McKinney, who opened the meeting from Developments by GEM, who is soliciting the community out, the input that we're doing today. Also Highland Planning with Chris Dunn and Tanya Zweland, who are also facilitating this process. Of course, Empire State Development, who is leading this whole charge. And this meeting is, and this task for revitalizing the market is actually part of a smaller initiative, the East Side Corridor Initiative, which is the revitalization of the Broadway market. There's also a planning process that will be going on with the Central Terminal, which is clearly a major asset to the area as well. There's also the East Side Commercial District program dedicated to the Broadway Fillmore Commercial District. So there are a number of exciting initiatives that are taking place on the East Side at this time, and we look forward to your input to see how we can facilitate a new and vibrant visioning of the Broadway market. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Janice.
Thank you very much. So as we walk through our overview of community engagement processes.
Yeah, Janice, we'll get to that in one moment. So real quick here, and actually it's a little out of order. So just real quick, I'm Christopher Dunn with Highland Planning. I just wanted to jump in and give everyone a quick overview and reminder about how to use Zoom webinar. So you may have noticed that you are muted upon entry, so we can't hear you, you can hear us. We're all the panelists here. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of the screen or the top of your screen there. Type in a question there, and at the end of this presentation, we'll get to it during our Q&A session. And then you can also, if you'd like to speak a question, you can click that raise hand icon, or if you're calling in by phone, you can press *9, and that'll do the same thing. We'll be able to acknowledge you. There's also a chat feature, so feel free to chat, any one of us, if you just have a comment or question. And as we do some polling a little bit later on in the meeting, you'll have an opportunity to respond to some of that via the chat feature as well. So with that, Janice, I'm going to just do a quick poll here just to kind of test things out. And we'll give you guys the opportunity to take this poll. So the first thing we wanted to know was just how did you hear about this meeting? And I'm going to launch the poll right now. And you can select several options here, and then we'll get to kind of watch as the poll unfolds live. So here we go. So everybody should have seen a poll pop up on their screen there. And I'm watching as the results come in, so feel free to, you can click multiple answers here. So don't feel constrained. If you heard about this meeting in multiple ways, feel free to select all the ways that you heard about the meeting. Looks like we've got about 70% of people have voted, so just a few more people can vote here. That would be great. All right, it looks like things have slowed down a little, so I'm going to just end that poll and share the results with you here. So you can see, you know, a lot of people heard about this meeting through the e-blast that we sent out. They saw it on Facebook. They saw it on the Market's website. Glad to hear that, you know, community leaders and organizations were also spreading the word as well. So I just wanted to do that as a quick test of the polling system we're going to be using. So I hope you had fun with that, and we'll do some more of that later on in the meeting just to get some input from you folks. So with that, Janice, I'll turn it back to you to talk a little bit about the community engagement process to date.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris.
And Janice, are you seeing that slide?
No, I'm not. So that's, I'll just hold it out for a moment.
Okay,
Nope.
Give me one moment.
No problem. If everyone else is seeing it, I'm good. Yep, there we go. Ready?
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. Overall, community engagement process developments by Jim, as you've already been told, was responsible for this piece of this project. So I'm going to give you just a summary of the things that we did to engage those in the surrounding community in Western New York as a whole. In-person meetings and project outset meetings were held on February 26th and 27th. And with the Bangladesh Community Association, and those were done in small focus groups, either during the morning or during the evening. We felt it was important to ensure that we did it at different times to ensure that we were getting as much input from the community as we could. We also did a go-to-them approach with pop-ups. We attended the East Side Corridor Economic Development Fund open house, which was held at the Northland Belt Corridor on February 5th. Also, there was a Variety Club telethon at Market Children's Carnival on February 22nd, which was right at the Broadway Market. Also, we attended the Larry Salters Band at the Market for Black History Month, which was held on February 29th. We also had virtual meetings that we did designate for certain groups of individuals, residents, vendors, because there was some certain feedback that we were trying to get from each one of these groups. So we did full-time market vendors on June 9th. We did Saturday and seasonal vendors on June 11th. We did a portion of the African American community residents on June 16th, which also included some vendors who were seasonal. And we did a overall virtual community meeting on June 23rd. The results of all these meetings is that we roughly had about 1,000 plus members engaged, including residents, organizations, Block clubs, churches, elected officials, financial institutions, business owners, and management. The community survey allowed participation by a wider region, and I'll hand that over to Chris as Highland Planning helped facilitate that. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Janice. So I'll just touch on the survey process real quick here. When we launched it at the end of March, as many of you probably remember, we were just in the middle of implementing social distancing and lockdown requirements here in New York State. So we knew the process had to be largely online and virtual. So we made sure the survey was available on the Broadway Market's Facebook page and on their website. We blasted it out to a whole bunch of contacts. We promoted it at a virtual meeting in June. And we also got some help from community organizations like Broadway Fillmore Alive that just of their own volition went out and shared it with their followers. So that was great. We also, have to acknowledge that, a lot of people in this community might not have access to the internet or computers reliably. So we wanted to make sure we could bridge that digital divide. So we sent out a postcard mailing across the neighborhood. We flyered the Broadway Market, just put out some information on how to safely take paper versions of the survey at the Broadway Market. And we also promoted the survey with local print media. So the result of all that, we had almost 700 responses to the survey, which I think is great. We have just a wealth of ideas on how to revitalize the market, which I'll touch on in just a moment. Real quick here, we're going to do just another poll now that we've kind of primed your memory about all the ways that we performed outreach throughout the project. We just want to know, how have you participated in the project so far? And I'm going to just launch this poll here. And you can, again, select as many options as you want, depending on how you participated in the project to date. And this just kind of helps us get a sense of, what outreach tools are really working with this community and how they can be replicated in the future as this project progresses and other projects on the East Side move forward. So take a minute to respond to the poll. Seeing about 50% of people have responded to the poll so far. And if you do select other, feel free to open up the chat, send us, maybe there's something we didn't include on here. Happy to hear about the other ways that you participated. And with the next poll, we'll also invite you to use the chat feature to contact us directly about, what are some of the other options you'd like to respond with. All right, so I'm seeing about 70% of people have responded here. I'm going to close the poll and I'll share the results. So most of you, 60% of you have attended a public meeting before. That's great. We had a public meeting back in June that was virtual. And we also had a kind of cluster of outreach events back earlier in the spring as well. Glad to hear that almost 50% of you have taken the survey. So you'll be familiar with what I'm going to be speaking to in just a moment. And then, of course, curious how else people have participated in the project, but that's interesting to hear. So I'm glad to hear that everyone here has gotten an opportunity to participate so far. And with that, I'm going to just quickly touch on some of the key findings from the community survey that we closed back in June. So right at the top of the key findings from the survey we found is that people really want more fresh foods, and they want more fresh foods from different cultures. They also want to improve the look and feel of the market. So they want an airier market. They want a lighter market. They want a market that has more of a connection with the outside and with the neighborhood. And we also heard that parking is really not an obstacle. So that's something I'll talk about a little bit more later. And it's something that we'll have to keep in mind as we look at ways to revitalize the market. And then we also heard from respondents that they want us to apply lessons from peer public markets to a revitalized or to our revitalization efforts at the Broadway Market. And, all that said, people also just wanted to let us know they love their market. In this presentation, you're going to hear a lot of suggestions about how we might improve the market, but it's important to remember that people in this community really care deeply about the market and they want to see it succeed. So I just want to make that known before we launch into this as well. So first up, that key finding about different cultures. So we asked right at the outset of the survey, would you be interested in seeing major ethnic groceries added to the overall tenant mix of the Broadway market? We gave them some examples. The answer that we heard from respondents was resoundingly yes. Almost 80% of respondents thought that was a great idea. And then we asked, okay, so what are some of the cuisines that you'd like to see? Where are some of the places you'd like to see food from? And these maps over here just show some of the region-specific and country-specific cuisines that respondents selected at the city level, at the neighborhood level, at the region level, and beyond. So we've got some real geographic diversity here and cultural diversity that people are looking for in a revitalized market. And people also wanted to see an improved look and feel for the market. So as I mentioned, really an airier, lighter, more transparent space. People want better ventilation. They want enticing aromas. And they want the interior of the market just to be an appealing atmosphere where they don't want to just get their groceries and get out, but they want to stay there and socialize and enjoy it maybe as a third space. And so, past studies have certainly looked at ways to rearrange sort of the layout of the market. And we think there's certainly an opportunity to work with vendors, to work with market management and ensure that the space is laid out in an inviting way and in a way that gives customers the best possible experience when they visit a revitalized market. So we also heard that almost everybody drives their car when they go to the market. But we also asked them, okay, so maybe you drive your car, but do you have any trouble finding parking once you get to the market? And 75% of respondents said no, they don't have any trouble finding parking. And that suggests that, during the revitalization process, maybe we can focus on managing that parking a little bit smarter, with changes to signage and wayfinding. Or other tools, instead of kind of just like adding to the sea of parking that already exists at that site and frankly doesn't make it visually more attractive. So that's something we'll have to keep in mind. And here we just wanted to, after kind of getting people's vision for the market, we wanted to gather some data on their behavior before revitalization of the market and after. So this graph really quick just shows the frequency of visits. On the left here, you see the most frequent visitors who are visiting more than weekly. In the middle are sort of the seasonal visitors and the yearly visitors. And then on the far right are the people who hardly ever visit the Broadway market. And we've also broken this out by geography. So we have folks from the neighborhood in yellow. We have folks from the city, but outside the neighborhood in green. And we have people from sort of the wider region in blue. And outside of the region, they have those black bars there. So clearly, looking at this graph of current visitation rates, most people are only getting to the market seasonally or yearly. That's not really sustainable for a public market, and so we want to do better than that. And so we then just ask people, hypothetically, if we revitalize the market, how frequently would you visit? And I just wanted you to take a look at what happens to this graph after revitalization. So everything sort of shifts to the left there. So at all geographic levels that we looked at, people are interested in visiting the market more frequently. So you have 40% of neighborhood respondents saying they would visit weekly or more. So that means they're actually looking to make this their sort of grocery destination every week. The destination maybe for takeout and restaurants, which is great. And we also heard something similar from city respondents as well. So we know this is just kind of a hypothetical question, but we think it really suggests that there is potential, if the market was revitalized, to increase the amount of times people are visiting the market, and that could really help with the neighborhood and help with the economics of the neighborhood as well. And lastly, in the survey, we kind of just opened it up and said, what's on your minds? And we just let people give an open-ended response about their thoughts on the Broadway market. And the things we heard were, the importance of the surrounding neighborhood and revitalizing the surrounding neighborhood. We also heard from some folks who said, hey, I have a lot of fond memories of holidays at the market. Please maintain some of the traditions that have made those fond memories. And then we also heard a major theme of needing to be kind of have a curiosity and interest in what other markets are doing and doing well. So here we've got just some quotes from the survey from respondents who mentioned markets that they want us to try and emulate here in Buffalo. And some of them are pretty close by: Cleveland, Columbus, across the border in Canada. And then some of them are international markets in Madrid and Budapest. So there's really a whole range of options here and a kind of global menu for us to draw upon. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Zaretsky of Public Market Development, and he's going to talk about some of those markets that we might be able to emulate in Buffalo. But first, just wanted to pause for another poll here. We're going to ask you about what other markets you've already been to. So I'll launch this poll here. And we've got a whole list here. Unfortunately, Zoom limits us to the number of 10, so we can't ask you about all 250, I think it was, public markets in the US. Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But
350.
350, I was off by 100. So go ahead and select all of the ones that you have visited on this list. And then, I'm sure there are ones that we didn't include. And if you scroll down on your poll there, you can select other, and then you can feel free to chat us, any of the options that we haven't listed here. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. And hopefully this will kind of just prime you to reflect on your experiences at other public markets, what you enjoyed, what you'd like to see in a revitalized market. And then you can kind of picture it as Aaron's walking us through some of the best candidates for peer markets that could be emulated here in Buffalo. So let's see, about 50% of people have voted. I'll just give you a few more seconds here. Nobody's been to Little Rock so far, it looks like. All right, I'm going to end that poll and share the results here. So we certainly got a lot of people who've been to other markets that weren't listed here, and I saw a few of them in the chat. Glad to hear that almost 30% of you have been to Pike Place. That's something that Aaron's going to speak to in just a moment. Also the Findlay Market and some of these other ones, so that's great. And I'll just take a look at the chat here. Just want to see what some people mentioned. Reading Terminal Market, we certainly heard about that on the survey. St. Lawrence Market nearby in Canada. The West Side Market in Cleveland, of course, and Boston Public Market. So lots of Quincy Market and Rochester as well. So lots of other public markets around the area that people have visited. With that, Aaron, I'm going to hand it over to you to speak to some of those markets.
Thank you so much, Chris. So I wanted first to say that, markets have been around for about 6,000 years. So we're not, we have the benefit of not having to reinvent the wheel. I think that, the Broadway market, I've worked on about 55, 60 different markets around the country and some internationally. And I don't think I've ever worked on a market that had such love and such community participation at the same time as, so many problems that needed to be addressed. And I think that in figuring out, trying to really hear the input that we got from, about 1,000 participants, it's a challenge to get that down on paper and to try and synthesize the responses, but I think that people will be pleased with the outcome. The markets that I think are most relevant to what we're trying to do with the Broadway market are three markets that I've had some involvement with. Pike Place Market, I was a director for about 15 years. And when I started at Pike Place Market, there were just a few hundred people living in the downtown. If people know the term Skid Road, that really came from downtown Seattle, and it was synonymous with bawdy houses and boarded up retail and huge amount of crime and a lot of social problems. there was an attempt to shut the market by the city, and the plan that the city had was to tear it all down and replace it with condominiums and an office tower, and they were going to put the new Pike Place Market on the roof, 14th floor of the tower. And a lot of people in the community didn't think that it was a good idea. I think people recognized, in some ways, it was similar to Broadway Market, where the market was really beloved by the community, but people recognized that there were really a number of issues that needed to be addressed. And it ended up being there was a citizens initiative that basically called for the market to be preserved and fixed up, but not torn down and moved. And the city opposed the initiative and spent about $1 million in opposing the initiative. And when the votes were counted, the initiative won by, I think it was about 85%. And the next morning, the mayor got on television and said, I've been for this all along. It's the best thing since chicken soup. And, we're going to go ahead and do it. And they founded a Preservation and Development Authority, which I became a director of. And we spent about $65 million in 1970 funds to renovate the market. That was entirely grant money. That was raised from federal and state and local and city and foundation and corporate and individual sources. It was a huge effort, but it was a very successful effort. Today, the Pike Place Market has about 14 million annual customer visits. It returns about nearly $6 million a year in annual tax revenues just to the city, and that does not include the transformation of downtown Seattle that most people credit with the renovation of Pike Place. So it grew from what had been the traditional Skid Road to a community that now has 85,000 residents. The city gets about $5.7 million a year in direct tax revenues, and the value of the property surrounding the market has increased by more than 15 times. So there's also a huge increase, which is not part of that 5.7 million in the real estate tax revenues that are enjoyed by the city. There's about 2,400 direct jobs, and including indirect and induced jobs, there's about 5,500 jobs. So it's a huge economic engine for the Seattle region. There are about 250 different businesses, and it's everything from carts to stalls to day tables to stores. And there's a lot of incredibly successful businesses that started at Pike Place Market, like Starbucks, like Sur La Table, like Cascadian Foods, which are all, multi-billion-dollar businesses, but they started as mom and pop businesses at Pike Place Market. I think we all know that Seattle is about double the size of Buffalo, and Pike Place Market is not the Broadway market, but it's a good example of what is possible when people commit creativity and grit and put their shoulders to the wheel to really make something to transform a market that was beloved but suffering into a market that was really wonderful. Next slide. So another market that I was involved as a consultant was the Midtown Global Market in Minneapolis. I don't know if people are familiar with Lake Street in Minneapolis, and this is in some ways a very similar story to the Broadway Fillmore District. A lot of poverty, a lot of crime. There was a Sears Tower that had been sitting empty for about 35 years. It was about 1.2 million square feet. It was full of asbestos and had really deteriorated, and so that the vacancy rate in the neighborhood, all the retail businesses were boarded up, and there was barely any retail occupancy in the neighborhood. And it really was the center for crime and prostitution and murder. We met with the mayor of Minneapolis and were able to convince them to turn the ground floor of the Sears Tower into a public market and to use the upper floors as a private development. And they did a request for proposals. We're able to get a national developer interested with our help, and it's the national developer put in a huge number of mixed income housing and medical offices, a Sheraton hotel. And I was back visiting the global marketplace a few years ago, and it was shocking. There was literally virtually no vacancy rate. All the businesses around the market had been fixed up. There were more than 50 merchants operating in the market. It was an international market. It wasn't international groceries, but it was international fresh foods. And they represented 22 separate cultures from countries all over the world. They had about 1.5 million annual patrons. The global marketplace took about $20 million in funds that we were able to raise, again, solely from grants. And it contributes well over $1 million back to the city of Minneapolis on an annual basis. Next slide.
Aaron, excuse me, if you could just speak a little louder. Some of the participants are having a hard time hearing you.
Sure.
You're doing great, but it's a little faint for some of them. Thank you.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you. Hopefully this is better. So the next slide is the Finley Market in Cincinnati. And when I think of a market story that is most similar to the Broadway market, it really is the Finley Market, because the Finley Market was the center for the Over the Rhine neighborhood in Cincinnati, which had a very similar story to the Broadway Fillmore district. It was historically a Polish and some German neighborhood. It had lovely architecture, and the market was full of, dozens and dozens and dozens of Polish and German businesses, and was really the center for a lot of commercial activity in Buffalo. Annually, there would be a parade around Thanksgiving and also around Labor Day that went by the Broadway market that had well over 100,000 people, more than half of the people who lived in Buffalo. And a lot of people have very fond and loving memories of the role that the Broadway market played in the history of Buffalo. The Over the Rhine neighborhood in Cincinnati was the epicenter of the largest riot in American history. And Finley Market at that time, when I was brought in to do a master plan, at that time they had 8 merchants, and they were all selling Polish foods, although the Polish and German residential community had moved out of the neighborhood, and it was mostly African Americans with a fair number of recent immigrants. We did a master plan. We were able to raise $20 million for the restoration and expansion of the Finley Market. It's amazing because it's been probably, it's one of the projects that I'm really the most proud of, because while it added some upscale uses, it really brought in a lot of uses that were relevant to the community. And so it has a very high percentage of African-American owned businesses and businesses owned by different international communities. The neighborhood itself, the top slide on the left is what the neighborhood looked like before the market's renewal. The slide on the bottom is what Over the Rhine looks like today. It's really, and this was done, this is not just a story of gentrification. There's probably more affordable housing units in Over the Rhine today than they were before. A lot of the housing in the over the Rhine neighborhood was boarded up and not being used. Today, there's over 100 merchants, or nearly 100 merchants. There's over 100 farmers, and the housing around the market went from 100% vacant to 100% occupied. It's really one of the most sought after housing opportunities in Cincinnati. It's also the #2 tourist destination in Cincinnati. Next slide. One of the things that's interesting about the Findlay market is that it is that cultural and economic diversity. So you can go to Findlay Market to buy, chitterlings and pig's feet, and literally right next door is the place selling wheatgrass to millennials, and it works. One of the things about Findlay Market and about other public markets around the country is people really enjoy rubbing shoulders with people who are different from themselves if they're in a safe and secure and clean environment, because markets are fundamentally social in nature, and they serve as a common ground. And so many cities like Cincinnati, and if I can say so, like Buffalo, don't have a lot of places that really serve as a common ground that brings different cultures together. So that's really the success of Findlay Market. It really has been the spark plug for revitalizing the Over the Rhine neighborhood that surrounds it. Questions, comments?
I don't have anything in the question. I did have a raised hand a little earlier. The phone number was ending in 4869, I believe. Chris, I don't know if you see them, if they still have a question.
Yeah, I saw somebody put up their hand, they put it down. We're
Okay.
having a couple issues with the Q&A, I believe. So if folks have questions or comments, if you want to use that raise hand feature, you can, if you're on the computer, you can click that little hand. We should be able to see that you've raised your hand and we can call on you. And then also if you're on the phone, again, you can press that *9 option and that should also raise your hand. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat feature. I think that should work as well. And we'll keep an eye out for your questions or comments.
Yep. And I don't see any at this moment, so.
We'll give.
While we're waiting for comments to come in, I just thought it was interesting when Aaron was showing the Over the Rhine before and after pictures. In the after picture, in the background, you can see their train terminal, which was also recently refurbished, and the same type of synergies in that neighborhood and opportunities are here. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, most definitely.
The demographics of the Broadway Film District and the Over the Rhine neighborhood are remarkably the same. But one of the ways that the Findlay Market was able to be so successful is it really went from a neighborhood market to a regional market. So people, use the Findlay Market on a week in and week out basis from all over the region, not just from the neighborhood.
Okay. Yep, I don't Chris, I don't see any questions, comments.
Looks
I'm
like
checking out the-
looks like Tanya's seeing some questions coming in. Tanya, you want to
Okay.
just read those off to us, and we can try and address them?
Yeah, sure. So we heard from Greg just a minute ago, who said, "What is the square footage of the Broadway market compared to these other markets?" And there's one other question, but I'll let someone answer that first.
So the Broadway market on the ground floor has about 95,000 net square feet of retail space, including the parking. So it's about half of that today. It's about 45,000 square feet. The Pike Place market is much larger, has about 450,000 square feet. The Global Marketplace in Minneapolis has about 85,000 square feet, so it's a little larger. And the Findlay market also has about 85,000 square feet. So the Broadway market is roughly, the entire ground floor of the Broadway market is roughly the same size as the entire ground floor or the entire footprint of the Findlay market and the Global Marketplace. And it's about a quarter of what Pike Place market is.
Okay, so the next two questions relate to gentrification. So I'm going to read them together. We heard from Kate, who says, "How do we encourage development without displacing the people who live there now? Can this project include jobs for people who live in nearby neighborhoods to help lift the community and not push people out?" And then Bob Shibley wrote, "Can you address the concerns of gentrification in Over the Rhine?"
Yeah, good questions. The way that we dealt with the issue of gentrification when I was a director at Pike Place Market is we made a legally binding commitment to, we figured out how many low-income housing units existed in the neighborhood before the renovation of Pike Place, and we committed that after the renovation of Pike Place, there would be at least that number. In fact, there's probably about 10 times that number today. It was very much of a consciousness from the beginning that it wasn't, for the Pike Place to succeed, it couldn't just be a market for low-income people, but that there had to be a commitment to serving that population and housing that population. And I think it was very successful. One of the things that I was involved in starting at Pike Place Market was there's a community health clinic, there's a senior center, there's a food bank, there's a child care center, there's a house for runaway kids, there's housing for frail elderly, congregate care housing. And this is all stuff that you don't see when you're squeezing the tomatoes in the main arcade, but it's very much designed to maintain the health of the broader community. The other thing that you don't see is there's a very carefully thought out curating of the tenant mix at Pike Place. So, people may know what sur la table is. If you want to spend $450 for a copper hand-beaten frying pan, that's the place to get it. But down the street, there's also a place called Kitchen Basics, which is really geared toward selling to the lower income and elderly population that lives around Pike Place Market. And that's a good place to buy a frying pan for $1.50. Kitchen Basic pays about 1/20th the rent of Sur La Table. They're both absolutely critical to the success of the overall market. The businesses and services that serve the low-income community are less obvious, but they are absolutely as important. There's also a market foundation in Seattle that I was the executive director of that raises money to help support that network of services. So I think we're very conscious that the solution to Broadway market is not just to sort of kick out all the traditional residents and, you know, bring in a lot of, you know, truffles and wheatgrass bars. But I think the solution is, and we heard this over and over again in the input, to create a market that is attractive to the much broader community, including all, you know, low income, middle income, and upper income people.
Aaron,
And
I have a follow-up question for you, Aaron, and then I do have 3 or 4 other questions in the queue. So I do want to keep moving so that we can get to
sure.
all of those. The follow-up question from Bob Shibley is, does any of the Pike Place social ecology exist in Over the Rhine?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is a children's playground. There is a daycare center. There is a community health clinic. There's a park, all of which were part of the master plan. All of which were added. You know, none of which were part of the original market, and so it's very much a part of Over the Rhine. And over the Rhine is not. You know, I mean, people think of Over the Rhine as being gentrified because there's a lot of 5-star Michelin restaurants there, but there's a lot of, you know, a lot of the original population. If I'm correct, I believe that there's actually more affordable housing units in Over the Rhine today. You know, it's very easy to find places to buy fried chicken and fried fish next to restaurants that are literally 5-star Michelin restaurants.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, the next question is from Scott. Was any vendor assistant offered to prime the pump at the Findlay market?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely. You know, the rent that, and this, what I'm about to say is true of all 3 markets that I mentioned, is they all have a differential rent structure. So, you know, for Mrs. Jones, who might make the best sweet potato pie and pies in the city and is selling them off her porch, you know, she'll get some help with marketing and packaging, and you know, she might pay 1/20th the rent of, you know, the person who's selling the truffles. It's very much of a rent structure that depends on who is selling and what they're selling.
Okay, next question. 2 questions from Suzanne. Once you get started, how many years will it take before the new vision is reality? And for the other markets, did you have any challenges in building relationships with local farmers, artisan vendors, and others?
Great questions. I think a lot of it depends on the, you know, the response from the public entities, that, you know, the city, county, the state. In all of these markets, there was a tremendous amount of money that was raised from corporations and foundations and, you know, private sources, but, you know, they are not going to commit without significant buy-in from government. And, you know, that, you know, I mean, you know, the state has sponsored this study and has committed downstream money for this. And I think it remains to be seen, you know, what other kind of public commitments there are. I don't, you know, I think people understand that, for example, the city doesn't, you know, can't write a check for $25 million to make this happen, but nobody's going to give to a project that doesn't have significant local buy-in. In terms of farmers, we actually, when I started at Pike Place, somebody had just made a movie called The Last Farmer in the Market. There used to be 900 farmers, mostly Japanese, selling at Pike Place Market. And when I started there working as a director, there were 30. And we started something called the Indo-Chinese Farm Project. This was right at the end of of the Vietnam War. And there were a lot of Hmong, Laotian hill tribes, people who lived in the neighborhood living on welfare, and basically they were illiterate. They had a digging stick technology. They didn't speak English. And we started classes in English. We used some grant money to buy tractors and to identify fallow land and help them establish themselves as Pike Place Market farmers. The biggest problem we had was they were incredibly hardworking. They were incredible farmers, and they would come in with mounds and mounds of 40, 50 different kinds of vegetables, none of which we'd ever heard of or seen, but all of which were completely scrumptious. And somebody would pick up one of the vegetables or fruits and hand them a dollar bill, and they would get $9, $10 bills and change. So we actually had to develop classes in how to make change. Today, a lot of those farmers are own some of the only farmland left in the county, and their sons and daughters are graduating first in their class in places like, Berkeley and Stanford and Harvard and so forth. So it was really a tremendous success story. Today, there's a long line of farmers and craftspeople waiting to get into Pike Place Market. There's several hundred. It's gone from 30 to, I think the last time I looked, there were like 400 or 500 farmers wanting to get in and or already there.
Thanks, Aaron. The next question is from Monica from the Central Terminal Restoration Corporation. And she said, do other markets have a model that incorporates an ongoing neighborhood advisory group?
The answer is yes. It depends on every market is distinct, and the market in Minneapolis was actually put together by a coalition of 3 community organizations representing the community around Minneapolis, and also the Somali community and the Hispanic community. So there the markets were actually being managed and developed by these different community organizations. So there wasn't an advisory committee. At Pike Place Market, there definitely was an advisory committee called the Constituency, and Findlay Market also there was there were advisory committees. I think it's really, I should say that each of these 3 markets were managed, 2 by nonprofits and 1 by a Preservation and Development Authority, which in effect is a type of nonprofit. All have independent boards of directors. The ownership in all 3 instances remained with the city, but the management was actually through a nonprofit.
Okay, I have one more question in the chat from Kat. Children can propel parents to frequent places.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts about making the 2nd floor into a kids zone? Perhaps make centerpiece a kids Broadway market, child size, need multiple attraction for children's interest. Examples, stilt walkers, special guests, etc. And she also says, I realize the virus may cause some difficulties.
Well, hopefully by the time this happens, the virus will be over. I totally agree with what you're saying, but there's lots of ways to involve children without putting them on the 2nd floor. There's going to be a lot of people in the input called for a special events area, and all the other public markets that I've been involved with have had major special events area, and part of the programming was geared toward children. At Pike Place Market, every fourth grader in the county within a 30-mile radius would spend a day at the market with their schools. We developed a fourth grade curriculum for them. And, you know, it was the place where they would meet the farmers, where they would learn that steak didn't actually grow in styrofoam containers. There were a lot of street vendors, buskers, you know, people who were doing things like stilt walking and juggling and so forth. And that some of the businesses, you know, you want a candy store, you want businesses that are geared toward children. One of the most important lessons I learned when I was at Pike Place Market is if you can get kids excited from the market, they will go home and drag their parents back, and their parents will become permanent customers.
Okay. I don't think we have any other chats, questions and answers, raise hands at all. Going once, twice, three times. We want to be conscious of time and thank everyone for joining us here. This meeting and materials are being recorded and will be posted on our website, as well as our final report on recommendations to revitalize the market will be ready by January of 2021. As a larger effort of the East Side Avenue revitalization plan, there's a couple of meetings that are coming up that we would encourage you to be a part of. We have the Central Terminal meeting, which is going to be a virtual online meeting also that will be held on October 8th, and all of the information is in front of you there. There is also on October 1st of 2020, there is a lighting improvements at Martin Luther King Jr. Park between 5 and 7 p.m. This is an in-person meeting. So if you're looking for more information on that, you can go to buffaloparks.org/MLK lighting. Again, that is October 1st. So that's actually tomorrow between 5 and 7 in MLK Park at the picnic shelters by the greenhouse. And then finally, LISC of Western New York is hosting an Equitable Neighborhood Development Virtual Summit being held on this Saturday, October 3rd, 2020, between 8:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. And again, I would advise you to go to LISC, L-I-S-C, westernnewyork.org, and all of the information of how to become a part of that will be available on their website. And again, these are all components of a larger East Side revitalization movement that is happening here in the city of Buffalo, and that's much needed. And everyone that has been on this call, everyone who's answered a survey, a question, spared 5 or 10 minutes of your time, is more than greatly appreciated. We have to ensure that the movements and the things that we have that need change, also make sure that it has the people at the helm to make those changes, because the people at the helm are the people who need to make sure they are benefiting from these changes. So if there are no other questions, I think also, yes.
If I can just make one very, very quick point, because I realized that I didn't really answer one of the questions, which is how long will this take? And
Okay.
you know, what I said was that, you know, a lot of that, you know, really depends on how, you know, local government responds to all of this. But, you know, in the best of all worlds, it's going to take several years. You know, this is not something that, if this is all approved, that, you know, you're going to be going to the new market overnight. It's going to take time to plan, to raise the funds, to do the construction, to recruit the merchants, and to, you know, have a grand opening. But that said, what I would encourage people to do is to really stay involved. And, you know, it's wonderful that there's, you know, we've had the level of input, and, you know, pay attention. Don't be afraid to speak out. We need your ideas. We need your, you know, support and commitment and comments. And, you know, we're gonna make mistakes, and you know, we need you to set us right. We're gonna suggest things. You know, you're gonna have ideas that we hadn't thought of, but stay involved. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Aaron. And we thank you, everyone, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you.